You spend hours sitting trying to meditate, and your depression only gets worse. But Buddhist monks have known for 2,500 years that staying still when your mind is agitated is like trying to calm the ocean by holding the waves. Buddha discovered that walking mindfully dissolves sadness from the inside out, because your steps synchronize with your breath and create a rhythm that your depressed mind can finally follow. These 12 walking meditations were developed specifically for when you're so heavy you can't even sit in silence. Every step you take consciously breaks a piece of the darkness that holds you. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment from which part of the world you're watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Have you ever wondered if something as simple as walking and breathing could quietly alter the shape of your day, slipping a slow antidote under the skin of grey heaviness? You step out the door with that old, familiar weight pressed across your shoulders. Maybe it rode the night atop your ribs. Maybe it was waiting for you at the breakfast table, and in that private moment, you decide, not with a dramatic vow, but in a tone soft enough for only your heart to hear. Today, for 10 minutes, I will just walk and breathe. Not a marathon, not a punishment, not a compulsive escape, just a page torn from the ordinary, written slowly enough that you can read your own handwriting. At first, the act of walking is embarrassingly automatic. Your body, on some ancient software, moves forward before you can even invite it, each shoe landing on muscle memory alone. But soon the invitation reaches your awareness, and you choose a rhythm the way you might select a lullaby or a prayer. 2 steps timing the in-breath, 3, perhaps 4, for the out-breath. The inhale arrives like the morning itself, fresh, solid, almost unremarkable in its reliability. The exhale, as you coax it longer, stretches out like cool wind, unraveling old imbursno drama, just a little sweep of renewal with every cycle. The street is still the same. Fences, utility poles, silent dogs behind gates, the ordinary cadence of city sounds. Yet as your chosen stride begins to synchronize with breath, the internal clock, that relentless wristwatch ticking inside your chest, loses some authority. For once, you are a little less hostage to your schedule, your anxieties, your endless rehearsals of disappointment and obligation. The mind, clever and incessant, does not take this mutiny lightly. It tugs you with little reminders, bills unpaid, messages unreplied, flashbacks stitched to regrets. You notice this, you hear the summons, and rather than argue or defend, you respond only with the sound of your own steps. Thud, 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 as if kindly letting the thought know, I see you, but I am here now. What unfolds next is not a miracle. You do not levitate. You do not suddenly radiate joy. No one on the street pauses to watch a luminous transformation. Instead, what arrives is something so quiet that you might only detect it if you are softened to the level of listening to grass grow. Each block, that subtle compression tight in your breast, opens, not like a rose, not like a cliché, but perhaps a millimeter at a time, as if a buttonhole were patiently being made big enough to allow air. Not through spiritual fireworks, but through the plain work of repetition. Each step, each counted breath. This is where the humility of practice meets the fidelity of your own body. You simply repeat the count. And even when you lose the rhythm, which you will, with the mind scampering away after a crow or a cruel memory, you do not scold yourself. You start again, as if welcoming a child who has wandered out of sight. 1, 2, 3 in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out. The sky does not darken because you forgot. The world does not judge. The courage lives in returning softly, again and again, to the count. Curiously, as you maintain this gentle discipline, the number silently blending with the tempo of your gait, the world that seemed so uniform, so flattened by the dull logic of depression, begins to regain its contour. You notice perhaps the caress of wind across your cheek, the sun's ancient warmth pooling at the back of your neck, the honest conversation between sneaker and concrete with each step. These sensations are not dramatic, but they are a scaffolding, a way for your nervous system to broadcast. Still here, still capable of contact with the undeniably real. Depression, that great thief of texture and time, often serves the hours to you in a tasteless, uneventful mass. Now, by walking and shaping the air through your lungs, you begin to regain seconds with shape and flavor. You experience the day in segments again, little parcels of now, handed gently back into your care. This, too, is a kind of re-education. Your attention, once trained to only chase catastrophes or scan for failures, now finds enough room within a step and a breath to notice the pulse of existence itself. When the count falls away, or you discover you've been lost for half a block in thought, the old reflex perhaps, to self-chastise, to pull further inside arises. But this practice invites you to answer with something radical. Forgiveness. You simply begin anew, unbothered, as fresh as the next inhale, less interested in perfection than in constancy. Here is where the first small embers of encouragement enter, not from triumph, but from this unusual self-tenderness. Humankind is so adept at discipline laced with scorn. Rarely do you get taught that discipline can be allied with mercy. And perhaps as you turn a corner, you choose a new experiment. What happens if you breathe in for 2 steps and breathe out slowly over 5? This longer exhale feels like sweeping the soot out of a chimney before the fire is relit. You do not force this rhythm. You let your body offer it as a suggestion, a possibility. Each extended breath draws out, almost invisibly, the backlog of old thoughts, releasing their gravity little by little. The mind, startled by the absence of its usual conflicts, finds itself, if only for a syllable or 2 of time, unemployed. In this emptiness, clarity can sometimes slip in, unnoticed. Nothing special, no proclamation, just an aperture appearing in the usual cloud cover. If you watch with your inner eye, with the perception that grows only in patience, you see that almost nothing remarkable has occurred, and this is the tremor of its greatness. You finished your small walk, returned to your home, and the world outside remains unchanged. But inside you, the air is a little roomier, the heart beats a little more gently, and your hands, so often clenched with resistance, feel the beginning of release. You come back not as a different person, but as one in possession of a little more space. You prove to yourself that you could influence your internal landscape without having to wage war against your mood. Not victory, but subtle, robust partnership. Night folds itself over the day once more, and perhaps tomorrow you will return to this ritual, not out of superstition or desperation, but because you now understand in your bones how a 10-minute rendezvous between air and movement can begin to inscribe new stories where only heavy ink once flowed. The next day, and then the next, not out of feverish hope for final healing, but out of respect for this slow cellular education. The body learns, step by step, to resist resignation, to gather instead the small soft proofs that greyness is not the only climate available. This is, at heart, the practice of anapanasati, breath awareness braided effortlessly with motion. Each cycle encourages you not to grapple against your condition, but to enter a subtle dialogue with it. You do not try to outpace sadness, nor pretend you are unscathed by the invisible fight. You do not aggressively manage your state. You attend to it as you might to an old friend carrying a burden, attentive but not intrusive, persistent but never forceful. If depression seeks to flatten the landscape, to draw every difference into a single oppressive horizon, breath-walking quietly re-establishes relief, the delicate hills and valleys of sensing and responding. With each circuit out into the world, your feet record a gentle refusal, a kind of protest against inertia that does not require speeches or slogans. The ritual itself becomes the teacher, showing your body how not to surrender its sovereignty to the monochrome logic. Some mornings, the weight will be heavier, and all the counting, all the slow deepening breaths will feel meager against the undertow. Yet even then, this is not failure. Each return to the practice is a reaffirmation that you are worth the investment of a gentle method. There is dignity in embracing the 10,000 small beginnings. From this simple act, so much can be rediscovered. When you notice, for example, the way the morning air bites differently after rain, or the peculiar music of sparrows in autumn, you are not just observing the world, you are reclaiming your seat within it. The act of walking and breathing dissolves, just a bit, the icy casing around your senses. possibility re-enters through the skin. Second by second, your state shifts, so slowly that others would never mark the change, yet you notice the micro-adjustments, a loosening in your stride, a new willingness to look up at the world instead of always at your feet. Let us linger for a moment on those lost counts, the inevitable episodes, when your mind, like a mischievous animal, escapes the fence. Herein lies the tender heart of Anapanasati as a companion on tough days. The discipline is not about holding on to the rhythm perfectly, nor is it broken by forgetfulness. Rather, it is about returning with kindness after each forgetting, the repetition of mercy, this long lesson in inner reparations. Each restart is a demonstration to your nervous system, gentle and insistent. You are not banished for your mistakes. Start again. The path welcomes you just as you are. So you walk, and the steps become less about going anywhere and more about being, in each possible sense of the word. Existing inside each stride, attuning to the present without the need to cleanse the mind of every shadow, you allow the body's trust to grow a trust that extends far beyond the 10 minutes of walking. The pulse slows not by force, but by consent, by gentle cooperation between muscle and intention. Breath is a teacher, legs an accompanist, the world a listener. In time, you begin to catch glimpses of what it means to influence your internal weatherhow. By regulating the most basic exchanges of air within you, you can, to a small but undeniable extent, shift the whole climate. Sometimes the fugue state returns, heavy and unavoidable. But the memory of small freedoms gained from these walks accumulates. It becomes a quiet archive, an anchoring resource for harder days. You find yourself imagining the breath as a tide, pulling and releasing, shaping the shoreline of your mood without erosive violence. Most people perhaps will never see the subtle labor that underpins such a practice. They will remark only that you seem more composed, maybe a little more patient, or a little less captive to the old cycles. But you, alone with the knowledge of these sessions, come to realize that the spectacular is not always necessary. In fact, sometimes the steady, uneventful act of showing up out of loyalty to the basic dignity of your own presences, the stuff of miracles in disguise. If this resonates for you, if you have ever carried the grey cloak of heaviness and wished for some method to fold it neatly, idle beneath your arm instead of pressing against your heart, I would invite you to explore this practice for yourself. Breathe in with intent, walk with kindness, let every lost count be forgiven, every moment of awareness reclaimed without judgment. Notice what changes, not instantly but gradually, through the slow miracle of repetition. Share, if you are moved, your own stories in the comments, your experiments with walking, your rediscoveries of air, your tiny proofs that the body can learn to stand up to the weather inside. Your experience, in all its honesty, might ease the walks of others, adding to a quiet network of feet and lungs, tracing circles back to steadiness. You are not alone. Each step, each breath, is a line in a wider poem being written across parks and sidewalks and quiet bedroom zone that, word by word, teaches us all how to keep walking, softly, toward the possibility of light. And so, as you carry yourself gently back those steps and breaths folding into one another like slow waves washing the inside corners of a long-neglected house, you might notice that something in you begins to crave, not exactly bigger, relief, but rather a finer, more attentive way of being with the moment. Almost as if your spirit, now freshly acquainted with a less heavy internal weather, yearns not just to count time, but to inhabit the delicate movements that life offers. If you would only reduce your speed and finally watch. There is an invitation here, subtle and persistent, to investigate what exists inside the simplest actions, to find the gold thread in the quiet choreography of your own body. In this way, the practice leans softly from breathing, with motion toward a contemplative relationship with movement itself. This is where the path of Satipatthana, in walking, begins to emerge before you, shimmering with the promise of seeing what is so often overlooked. You sense it, the compulsion to hurry, to rush through corridors and streets, the mind sprinting far ahead of your feet, rehearsing old arguments or conjuring catastrophes in places you have never even set eyes on. You wake in the morning, or after one of those shallow, punctuated naps that the body sometimes mistakes for rest, and the whole world feels like a hallway, a long queue in which you shuffle, impatient, towards something that never quite arrives. What if you could, just for a while, slow that restless pulse, not in the service of laziness, but to open up a field of noticing that has always been your birthright, but was pressed flat beneath habit and expectation? You stand now in a space that is unremarkable a hallway in your home, a narrow veranda catching the day's thin light, a stretch of sidewalk outside a building you have passed by 1,001 times. Here, in this place usually reserved for transition, you choose to invite attention to reside in each single movement, to slow, perhaps even to the point of discomfort, until you learn what the body has tried to tell you with every step for years. You place your standing foot upon the earth, yourself as the first witness to a ceremony that is simultaneously ancient and tenderly new. The other foot is momentarily weightless, and you bring your awareness deliberately to that suspension, the act of raising the heel, the pressure shifting to the ball of the foot, the transfer of labor from one limb to the next. You might say, silently or aloud, as a way of making a ritual. Lifting. Then, as the foot slowly glides forward, sometimes almost as if through honey, sometimes with only the idea of movement preceding the action itself, you intone, moving. And then, as your foot returns to the embrace of the earth, as the heel descends, then the toes, as the full arc of your weight again finds ground, you conclude, placing. The other leg follows, and you become, if even for a breath, an artist of attention, painting each second with the full pigment of presence. Lifting, moving, placing, right, then left, over and over. The words follow the exquisite tempo of the body's own physics, becoming less mantra and more an honest registration of what is undeniable in this present. At first, especially if you carry the heavy mantle of worry or habits shaped by a culture that worships constant acceleration, you might find the whole thing a bit absurd. Your mind, that clever storehouse of wit and criticism, will laugh or chide. What do you think you are doing, creeping up and down the hallway like a novice actor on a silent stage? It wants you back inside your mental loops, scrolling the endless feed of self-reproach, unfinished errands, secret embarrassments. But the invitation here is to stay with the ridiculousness, to answer criticism with the stubborn simplicity of persistence. Lifting, moving, placing. You may find yourself narrating. The sole of your foot becomes a geographer, telling stories of the floor's temperature, the unevenness of a tile, the softness of a carpet, the warmth or chill of wood under pressure. There, the roughness stirs a memory of a childhood porch. Here, the almost imperceptible yielding suggests a forgiveness in every step. The ankle is no longer a forgotten hinge, but a participant, negotiating its own balance, a diplomat between gravity and ambition. The knee, perhaps a little stiff with the rumors of age, learns to trust inertia anew. The calf, too long spent in the prison of a chair, kindles itself for this understated adventure. Lifting, moving, placing, and so, step after deliberate step, realization dawns. To walk, which you thought the most nondescript of abilities, is in fact an orchestration, a marvel of micro-adjustments, an entire concert of muscles and tendons and intention. The act of walking becomes not a way of getting somewhere, but a symphony that, for a handful of moments, allows the mind and body to argue less and collaborate more. It is in these minutes you begin to believe that, even if your thoughts are heavy, your presence is an anchor that can keep you upright when the internal weather turns rough. Now, inevitably, after a few cycles, the mind throws heavier distraction-souled dramas, looming doubts, a sudden urge to solve everything that aches inside your chest. A worry appears like a cloud. What if I am failing? What if nothing works? What if this too cannot shield me from the sadness I carry? At this crossroads, you do not wrestle with the thought. Instead, with all the quiet dignity you can muster, you name it, thinking. You return attention not through force, not as a punishment, but as a gentle nudge, the touch on the shoulder of a friend who lingers too long by the window. Back to lifting, back to moving, back to placing. What emerges slowly but with a growing confidence, is the awareness that every step, however slow, hesitating, even clumsy, breaks the spell of rumination, if only briefly. Each footfall is a seal, as if your existence were stamped directly onto the passport of the now. Your mind, accustomed to spiraling into judgment or panic or self-neglect, is offered a different occupation for a while, to monitor not the endless swirl of projection and memory, but the intricate negotiation of balance and sensation. The safety you discover is not the guarantee of ease, but the refuge found in the simple sequence that does not ask brilliance of you, nor dazzling insights, only existence. After 15, perhaps even 30 minutes as time slides away in the absence of urgency, you realize you have amassed a surprising collection. Dozens of steps, each one conscious, each returned to with the faith of a sunrise. A quiet competence grows. Yes, I have been here for myself. Yes, even when my head screamed or my heart strangled, I managed to remain for these minutes inside my own experience. Where depression often argues for all or nothing, laying down cruel ultimatums, Satipatthana in walking deals exclusively in the slow compound interest of little moments, accumulated until one morning you discover that you have crafted a foothold in your own day. You may feel no rush of extationally, perhaps an elusive, nearly imperceptible adjustment in the volume of internal noise. You close your practice, or simply let it fade, and discover, with something that feels very close to relief, that your mind is not empty, but less circled by storms. You did not defeat your suffering, but you managed to give your attention dignified work for a stretch of minutes that did not require labeling every thought as toxic or every mood as doom. This, after all, is the subtle revolution of Satipatthana as it meets walking. To realize that the body, patiently and without fuss, gives shelter to a kind of safety, while the storms rage elsewhere out there, in the world and in here, in the personal weather. There is a territory inside the choreography itself where shelter is possible. When the world inside becomes hostile, the foot offers a whisper, a counterpoint, an option. Come with me. We will lift, move, and place. And in this pattern, you can rest the raw nerves of being alive. You may find, as I have, that this practice becomes a kind of homecoming. On days when the gloom returns as early as sunrise, or when anxiety stabs sharp right behind your eyes, before you even have time to say good morning to yourself, you can lace your shoes or walk barefoot across the safe length of a bedroom and summon this sequence lifting, moving, Plasinga's a quiet rebellion. When the mind shouts impossible, the body continues, soft and sure. There is, too, a rhythm that cannot be enforced, but only discovered. Some days, the practice flows as if you were waltzing with your breath. Other days, it is the slow progress of someone learning to move again after injury or loss. There is room for all of it, for the awkwardness, for the resistance, for the fizzing patches of distraction or resentment. You might not ever become a master at mindful walking, but by returning, day after day, to this humble triad lifting, moving, placing you apprentice yourself to steadiness, to a fidelity with your own groundedness that will serve you no matter how stormy or calm your internal world becomes. Noticing a thought arise, you label it thinking. Noticing a discomfort in the body, a tight knee, a tingling heel, a groan of fatigue, you can greet it, not with complaint, but with a kind of grateful acknowledgement, sensation, or, if you prefer, noticing. Each label, gently attached and just as gently released, is like marking a waypoint on a map before moving quietly into the next breath, the next footfall. Maybe, as the days go by, you bring this practice out of the privacy of your home and into the slightly more public world. A park, perhaps, in the soft light of late afternoon, when the benches have grown warm under the sun and the shadows begin to lengthen. Here, you may walk a little faster, or with shoes more accustomed to concrete, but still you hold within your heart that same hush, lifting, moving, placing. The world may bustle, people may pass, dogs may tug their humans after scents, and yet within you, the tempo remains. In such moments, you rediscover that all of life is occurring at once: the rush, the stillness, the thousand small drama sand, yet for a string of seconds, you are granted sanctuary in your own simple motion. Sometimes, someone will see you, perhaps a loved one, or even a stranger, and ask, "What are you doing? Why are you walking so slowly?" As if you are underwater, or lost, or looking for lost change. You might smile, or perhaps you just nod, recognizing in their question the usual haste of this world. You do not need to explain. You know by then that you are not wasting time, but finding it, as one might fish coins from a fountain where wishes have been thrown and forgotten. Other days, the doubting voices get louder. Why are you bothering? What good is this to anyone? On these days, it helps to remember that the body understands slow learning. Muscles and nerves have always known that repetition is the ground from which strength and sensitivity arise. When you seem to regress, starting again from lifting, moving, placing with the clumsy enthusiasm of a beginner, you are engaging not in a failure, but in the ecology of human growth. The mind is never still for long, but the tide always returns to the shore. And so too will your steadiness return each time you step onto this narrow stage of walking. There is a generous secret herein that I hope you will discover for yourself. If you practice for minutes at a time, or for long wandering stretches, the world within and without begins to respond. You might notice, as the practice weaves its threads through your days, a strange immunity developing, not an armor against pain or panic, but a resilience, a permeability that allows you to admit difficulty and yet not be washed away by it. When a thought or feeling strikes, instead of collapsing under its weight, you can say, almost with affection, "Welcome, I see you," and then gently, lifting, moving, placing. Your step, no matter how small or hesitant, is a reminder that within every act of motion exists the possibility of return. A return to yourself, a return to a body that has weathered storms fiercer than this, a return to a present that is never quite perfect, but is always, stubbornly, here. Sometimes that is all one needs, not the consolation of complete relief, but the fact of still being able to come home, step by step, to a life that waits for you to notice it. If, at the end of the day, you find yourself restless, perched restlessly at the edge of sleep, I invite you to bring the memory of your walking practice into the night. Imagine it vividly lifting, moving, placing the memory echoing in muscle and bone, inviting your mind too to place itself gently down onto the pillow of the present moment. Breathe into the bed, attend to each cycle of tension and release, and, if you wish, let the rhythm of mindful walking lull your awareness until the boundary between movement and rest, between walking and dreaming, becomes soft and thin. And as you drift, or as you reflect, remember that this, like any practice worth its salt, is a gift best shared. Join me in the quiet rebellion of moving through the world at a pace that allows you to see, truly see, everything you have been running past for years, each marvelous detail of being alive, each proof that tenderness is possible even in the hardest seasons. I would love to hear, in your own words, how this slow attention has transformed your days, or simply blunted the sharp edge of a difficult hour. Share your reflections, your small victories, your hardest stumbles. Your story, in all its particularity, is light along the path for others who walk with burdens heavy as your own. Let your feet remember the feeling of gentleness. Let your muscles find comfort, not in speed, but in intimacy with the world that carries you. In the quiet of your next walk, be it a measured procession in your room, or a slow loop through a park, or even a small patch of kitchen worn smooth by repetition, may you know the solace of being with yourself, fully, step by precious step. May this mindful walking become not just a practice, but a refuge, a corner of presence that no storm can quite erase, as long as you keep returning to the gentle truth, lifting, moving, placing. When the gentle cadence of mindful steps lifting, moving, placing has carved out a new terrain for your days, an unexpected calm lingers afterward, like the hush in a garden just after the rain. You settle into a sense that, even in stillness, you are moving in a wider current, carried by a practice that invites you to meet yourself as you are, wherever you wander. The thought tiptoes in, perhaps first as a whisper. What if, instead of staying faithful to even a gentle rhythm, you let yourself go slower, still so slowly. In fact, that movement dissolves into moments of pure presence. It is in this pause, outside the need for progress or accomplishment, that you find the subtle, radical art of kinhin. There are mornings when haste presses itself against you before you even open your eyes, when the prospect of meeting the full speed of the world feels like stepping onto cold stone with bare feet. These are the days when you sense, with animal acumen, that any attempt to run faster will only tear at what is already raw inside you. You know, instinctively, that acceleration is not salvation. If anything, it's the agent that wears your edges thin and scatters any chance for quiet. So you decide, not with bravado, but with the stubborn hope that the day might still be stitched back together, to try a different experiment. You choose to slow down radically, almost paradoxically, until walking itself is transformed from an act of transit into a field of intimate repair. This is kinhin, the walking meditation practiced in Buddhist tradition, but it is also something entirely yours, shaped by the specific ways your heart feels battered on this particular morning. You select a small spacer stretch of living room, the length of a hallway, maybe the short lane of sun across your terrace inhabiting this modest square of the world, as if it were both sanctuary and laboratory. The idea is not to fill the space with achievement, but to let each centimeter of it offer up the textures of now. You allow the hands to find one another in gentle contact, folding in front of your chest or cradled one atop the other at your belly, signifying a quiet unity between forward momentum and containment. The gaze drops, not out of shame, but as an intentional choice, a way of dimming the outer light, so that you can see the subtle illumination inside. You breathe normally at first, not changing the breath to signal accomplishment, but simply waiting to see what the breath will offer today. The invitation arises to synchronize your movement with your exhale, to let every step unfold only when the breath empties out. Thus, you remain motionless on the in-breath, letting your body recall how it feels to be still and saturated with air. With the out-breath, you slide one foot barely breaking contact with the floor, as if each toe wishes to maintain its conversation with the ground, just a single, deliberate step forward. The body pauses then, waiting for the next tide of in-breath before moving on. In this slowness, you are no longer advancing through space. You are being carried through time, as if someone else is winding the clock at half its normal speed. In those first minutes, your mind rebels, twitching against the constraint, flinging discomforts at you. You are wasting time. You are being ridiculous. You should be doing. You should be deciding. You should be elsewhere. The body, too, hums with tiny urges to rush, to skip steps, to rejoin the ordinary velocity of a restless world. Yet you remain, because something in you intuits that in this deliberate reduction-own step per exhale, motionless with the in-breather, lies a kind of shelter. Each moment stretches like taffy, the molecules of time separating to let your attention enter. Before, you might have believed that you needed more hours in the day. Here, in kinhin, you discover that you needed more room in each minute. With the outer motions so restrained, you suddenly hear the inner world in a fresh, unvarnished register. You notice first the pull of gravity tracing its invisible line down the back of your heel, tugging your skeleton home. You feel the subtlest of tensions in your hips, the delicate negotiation in your spine, as it tries to remember both the necessity of uprightness and the rightness of yielding. You sense the small symphony of adjustments in your shoulders, the tiny swings of balance your ankles orchestrate with every fractional movement. Kinhin does not allow you to flee from your mood. Instead, it offers you a place to rest beside whatever trouble has found you today. You might, without resistance, discover that anxiety or sorrow is physical, a flutter at the base of your throat, an ache behind your eyes, a heaviness inside your chest. These feelings are not scolded or medicated or argued away. They are set upon the altar of your attention and given permission to accompany you. This is a practice of patience, where each footfall is a gentle voice repeating, "I am still here, even with this." You walk with your mood, not against it. You carry your pain, not as a punishment, but in the manner of someone escorting a fragile guest across a busy street. You walk, literally, through your own discomfort, and find it rarely as unmanageable as you had feared. Soon, you begin to notice something extraordinary, disguised as ordinariness. The very act of moving slowly softens the urgency of your distress. When a thought barges in, I am late, I must be productive, I cannot waste any more. You do not hurry to shut it out, nor do you greet it with open arms. Instead, you treat it like the distant noise from a street corner, acknowledged, received, but not allowed to determine your rhythm. The world outside might be careening toward ever greater velocity, but for these few minutes, you decline the invitation to join it. You place each foot down with ceremony, as if every step were your first, as if the earth itself has been waiting all morning to feel your weight upon it. As Kinhin continues, you are inducted into a new understanding of time itself. What felt at first like a punishment, this dragging out of each moment, becomes a rare privilege. The seconds lengthen between footfalls, and here, tucked between one exhale and the next, live entire microclimates of experience. A flicker of peace between anxious pulses, a bloom of gratitude as your eyes catch the geometric architecture of light filtering across the wall. Sometimes, for the briefest span, the narrative engine that has always churned in your mind sputters and falls silent. In the silence, you realize there is nothing you must achieve, nothing you must prove. You are here sufficiently. The normal demand to be elsewhere vanishes. Now, you can simply belong to your own step, as slowly as you dare. Physicality in Kinhin is a lesson in itself. With each breath, you notice how the foot seeks the ground not from habit or urgency, but as an act of inquiry. How does this floor, this grass, this patch of sunlight receive me today? The body answers back with subtle feedback, a recalibration of balance you never spent attention on. The twist in your lower back that seems to loosen in stillness, the way your palm finds comfort nestled against your own belly or folded into the other hand. The body finds a home in itself, not by force, but by yielding, as rain soaks slowly into thirsty soil. You understand at last that the principle here is not submission, but integration. All of you, the restlessness, the pain, the quiet resilience can walk together, even if it means walking at a pace that feels impossibly slow. One of the unspoken gifts of Kinhin is that it asks nothing more of you than participation. Whether or not your mind is still, whether or not you feel any trace of relief, every careful step is valid, every pause is permitted. The success of the practice is not measured by enlightenment or emotional transformation, but by the fact that you remain present, not in spite of your difficulties, but because you have agreed to include them. When discouragement arises, when your thoughts rage against the patient movement of your body, you simply let yourself be distracted for a moment. Then, gently, you return. Step. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Step. Every person has days when they wish they could become invisible, or step outside the story of their life altogether. There are mornings when your own internal voice gnaws at you, nibbling confidence away with sharp little criticisms, and on these days, the last thing you want to do is encounter yourself stripped of occupation, movement, or disguise. Yet, it is precisely on these days that Kinhin is most transformative. The hide-and-seek ceases. There is nowhere to rush to, nowhere to withdraw from. You befriend your own experience, not by fixing it, but by accompanying it. Imagine, if you wish, a child afraid of the dark, or an animal trembling in the midst of thunder. You know instinctively not to pelt them with advice, nor to tell them to be stronger, nor to insist they ignore their own fear. Instead, you might sit beside them, saying little, but offering the warmth of your own calm. In Kinhin, you practice such kindness with yourself, sitting beside your mood, crossing the room, however, slowly until the agitation, if it must persist, at least does not have to fight for space. Someday you may look back on these slow steps and realize that this was the foundation of your patience, that the body learned to remain while the mind surges and falls, that you developed a muscle more quietly enduring than any strength you thought you needed. Perhaps, if you attend with increasing sensitivity, there are even moments in Kinhin when your neutrality allows insight to slip through. The stiff mood that seemed all-encompassing softens for a second. You discover that your feelings, like weather, do not belong to you as much as they pass through you. You are not the storm, but the ground that holds it. Movement does not conquer what hurts, but it braids a new narrative. The story of someone capable of remaining present with discomfort and of transforming pain not by denial, but by companionship. Every exhale, every uncertain step, mends something along the inner seam where panic or grief has torn. It is not always dramatic. Many days you will finish your slow walk only to find your bones a little warmer, your jaw more relaxed, your mind perhaps just a notch quieter. There will be no applause, no evidence to persuade an outside observer you have done anything but waste time. Sometimes you feel a subtle sadness that the world does not cheer for patience as it does for productivity. But with repetition, the reward accumulatesimal, steady, and virtually unnoticeable, the fabric of your day patched from the inside out. If you feel moved, I invite you to notice the intervals during your next Kinhin practice, the spaces between steps, the silence that pools between your breaths, the microsecond when your urge to rush is transformed by your willingness to pause. This is the place where patience grows, unharried, unharassed. Over time, the slow pace becomes a kind of shield, soft but resilient, against the jagged edges of urgency that so often cut through our days. In moments of restlessness, you might recall, I am allowed to move even more slowly than my sadness. And there is healing in this recall, a repair not broadcast outwardly but stamped quietly in the way you hold yourself, in the way your presence ceases to hurry. Perhaps, after Kinhin, you notice the day is not changed dramatically. Maybe the same list of tasks, the same difficult feelings await you, yet something essential is now different. The mood is cushioned, its claws a little blunter, its gloom less adhesive. You can pick up your routines once more, but the day no longer feels sharp-edged or perilous. Instead, there is a small but certain softness, as if the light moves differently through the window, as if each cell in your body received a tiny memo that it might, after all, endure. If there is wisdom worth sharing from this practice, it may be this. Your capacity for patience is not a luxury, nor is it a gift for the lucky few. It is a technology of the spirit, available to anyone willing to grant themselves the time to walk slowly, especially when the mind screams for anything but slowness. The world will rarely demand you pace yourself gently. It is up to you to supply this necessity, to become the kind of presence that refuses to overdraw the account of your own endurance. You find, eventually, that this practice is not reserved for those moments in a meditation hall or structured times of formal retreat. It can be folded into the smallest corners of your day, single slow crossing from bedroom to kitchen as dawn breaks, a deliberate pause between chores, the choice to walk at half speed through a crowded supermarket, attending quietly to the miracle of movement itself. Each time you reclaim the pace of presence, you mend a thread of the day's fabric. You remind yourself, at a deep and wordless level, that gentleness with your own tempo is a radical act. As this day closes, as you nestle into the familiar terrain of your home or the quiet litany of nighttime rituals, let the memory of slow walking accompany you. The day may have been ordinary, or it may have been hard beyond words. Regardless, the simple fact that you granted yourself permission to move at the speed of patience is itself a quiet celebration. I invite you to linger here a little longer, to reflect in the comments if the mood strikes, and to carry forward into tomorrow a willingness to walk with softness, even especially when the world urges you to run. With every step you take, just a breath slower than your pain, you are not only repairing the seams of your own story, you are teaching body and mind new ways of meeting difficulty, not with violence, but with attentive care, not with denial, but with that rare, beautiful companionship that turns the ordinary act of walking into an act of gentle revolution. This, perhaps, is enough, and you find, after walking slowly enough for your heart to rethread its seams, that there comes a day when, rather than resistance or melancholy, you greet yourself with a kind of tentative openness and impulse, not to battle or even to analyze, but gently to befriend the one inside who suffers. Perhaps this is not a morning draped in beauty or optimism, but the air feels less tight, your body less defended. The world outside the window remains itself, stubborn and disinterested in your mood, but something within you allows the idea to surface. What if you tried not just to move more kindly, but to shape the very tone filling your own mind as you cross the day's threshold? Maybe today you will experiment with yet another kind of walking, one stitched not only from slowness and attention, but from a subtle, warming intention, infusing each footfall, however small, with the language of kindness. It begins unexpectedly. You pull your shoes on, or leave them by the door. You choose a route known by heart or improvise one on a whim, guided by the weather of your mood. If the day lacks orchestrated harmony, let its very ordinariness become the first note of your gentle experiment. As you step out, you remember, perhaps intuit for the first time, the old quiet practice of metta, loving kindness, and the way it can be woven into the tapestry of each walk, not as forced affirmation, but as a background hum, the way sunlight in days when it is shy still manages to touch the surface of the world. Perhaps at first, this feels artificial. You have rehearsed harsh inner dialogues for so long that to wish yourself well can sound almost like a stranger's joke, a script scribbled by the naive. Yet, if you lean into this practice with curiosity and not demand, something curious happens. The inner temperature begins, ever so gradually, to shift. With the rhythm of your steps 2 paces at a time, or whatever cadence feels most natural, begin to introduce quiet phrases. Maybe at first, awkward or stilted, you murmur within yourself, "May I be at peace," allowing each syllable to coincide with the predictable movement of your legs. 2 steps more, and another phrase floats in, "May I be safe." You let the ground echo the words, not broadcast in triumph, just laid down softly so that the earth might carry the wish forward. Your voice, that inner whisper which is so often stern or withholding, now experiments with the languages of care. May I have health. May I live with ease. Your steps become an embroidery, each repetition a stitch reinforcing the fragile fabric of goodwill inside you. You do not hurry or chide yourself for drifting into old cynicisms. If you notice the mind rolling its eyes or the old voice mocking, "Who are you kidding?" you simply include that too, letting the phrase persist, not as a cure, but as a companion on your journey. After a few cycles, perhaps a few short city blocks, or the length of the park's perimeter, it occurs to you that these words are not actually demands on the universe, nor desperate attempts to suppress pain. You are not promising yourself undisturbed happiness. You are tuning the instrument, the resonant, unpredictable instrument of your mind, teaching it the musical scale of benevolence. Slowly, step by conscientious step, you remember that the inner climate can be slightly regulated, not by dictatorship, but by gentle, rhythmic suggestion. You notice, with a subtle surprise, that the body and the words begin to move together. As you breathe, as you pace yourself along quiet or crowded avenues, the sentiment behind each phrase estranges itself from mere language, softening into mood. Something begins to thaw behind your ribs, not all at once, but as warmth seeps into cold hands after a long walk home at twilight. Kindness, especially toward yourself, can begin as play, a hypothesis, a melody tried out in private. The transformation is not mythic. You are not suddenly smitten with self-love or ablaze with certainty. But maybe, in the vast and ordinary silence between thoughts, there is a gentle, unclenching hesitation to judge, a millimeter of breath between pain and old reflex. Soon, you realize these blessings need not be a closed circuit, swirling only within your own chest. You begin, with that same tentative curiosity, to send the same well wishes outward. The rhythm of your steps, still slow and attentive, becomes the metronome by which you offer a quiet, "May you be at peace," addressed to a friend, remembered or imagined, someone whose comfort would not feel false on your tongue. You walk, and in the pause between your heartbeat and your next inhalation, you repeat, "May you be safe," sending the wish through time and distance, as if it were a message struck softly against a tuning fork. 4 steps later, may you have health, and after that, may you live with ease. This too may tremble under the absurdity of habit. After all, the mind is so trained to sort people into stories of competition, envy, irritation, misunderstanding. Yet as you practice, the words lose their ceremonial stiffness and settle into the familiar salt and grain of sincerity. You allow the faces in your mind to change, sometimes a loved one, sometimes an acquaintance, sometimes a passing stranger, the cashier at a store, the person jogging by, the delivery driver with weary eyes. You do not have to force warmth or imagine intense bonds. It is enough to let the phrase drift outward like a lantern pushing aside dusk. The mood continues to shift, sometimes imperceptibly, until you catch yourself in a tiny gesturous smile at a dog sniffing a hydrant, a soft glance toward an elder balancing groceries, a private hope that someone you will never meet feels a little lighter inside their day. Rather than romanticize kindness, you observe it as elementally practical, like a mug of soup on a cold evening, something that does not solve all pain, but allows you and those you encounter room enough to breathe. Wishing well for those you struggle to like or cannot quite understand, the neighbor whose music never quiets, the colleague whose emails bristle, the relative whose opinions chafe can feel like learning a new tongue at first. Here, you may remember that loving kindness is not about admiration or erasing boundaries. It is simply shifting, by half a degree, one's posture toward humanity, and by that same token, toward yourself. The world does not grow less complicated, but it grows, for a breath or two, less antagonistic. You are not erasing your own judgments or grievances, you are softening your hold upon them, and so, with metta walking, the cityscape or the leafy avenue, or even the short, familiar corridor, becomes a corridor of possibility. You let your gaze rest with tenderness on the young parent coaxing a child along, the group of workers laughing together under the sweep of a tree's shadow. Even the distant hum of life mistakes you for a steady witness. Every step, every inhalation followed by a whispered wish. Lucensif, only for moments, the armor that stress and isolation build around your chest. The walk is not transformed into a parade. It remains modest, and yet within you something opens that neither exhaustion nor complaint can quite close. There are moments, as you walk, when the voice of doubt returns, the old scholar of your internal dialogues, that professor of cynicism insisting, this is indulgent, pointless, sentimental. When this occurs, you do not fight or debate. You let the inner skeptic sit next to you on the bench of your attention and direct the wish to that part of you as well. May even the parts of me that think this is silly be safe, be well, be at ease. This is kindness, not as a script, but as a spontaneous shelter. Sometimes you experiment with broadening the loop even further. May all beings be at peace. May all those who carry pain, visible or invisible, find shelter. These are not slogans, not performances of virtue, but quiet directions in which you aim the current of your heart. Each stride carries the possibility of a fresh, wisher-hidden act of resistance against the great flattening force of depression or the sharpness of alienation. You are, step by step, asserting a gentleness not just for yourself, but for the wide, wild, wounded world. And, just as the meta-phrases extended tentatively from your own lips, they now infuse the way you take in the world. The simple act of walking so, long, numbingly automatic, becomes the means by which you touch the lived reality of being alive. The wish for safety extends to the curled-up cat on a windowsill, to the crowded bus carrying lives unknown, to the homeless person curled beneath a loose blanket. Your internal climate bends, ever so slightly, toward connection. You find that it matters little whether the wish is heard or acted upon. The act itself, the generosity of attention, becomes the gift. There may be days when sadness is so thick around you that saying, "May I be at peace," feels like climbing a frozen hill barefoot. Still, you persist. Maybe the phrase contracts, "May I get through today. May I remember to eat." This too is a victory. Your loving kindness adapts to weather, offering warmth even when the sun inside disappears for a season. As the weeks unfold and you revisit this practice, it changes your inner idiom. The phrases that began as deliberate, almost clumsy, words become a private accent, a tone setting the background of self-conversation. You catch yourself wishing well for yourself without drama, correcting old narratives not aggressively, but with the understated return of, "May things be a little lighter, may I be gentle with my limits, may whoever crosses my path today be met, even for a heartbeat, with care." Sharpened by practice, the inner critic loses a measure of its authority. If self-accusation arises, "You are ridiculous. You are failing at kindness. You are only pretending," you answer with metta itself, "May I be safe, even in my doubts." There is no sword swung against your own mind, only the repeated willingness to permit tenderness to have its say. You are not polishing perfection, but watering a patch of earth, parched by long seasons of self-withholding. And so, your steps, those companions from the very first exers, become vehicles not just for presence, not just for slowness, but for a quiet revolution in how you inhabit your story. Each walk, each rhythm of wish and stride, realigns you with the possibility of warmth. Even when you feel you have accomplished nothing, the fact that you consented to try, that you composed a subtle music of goodwill that only you could hear, is itself an act of reclamation. I invite you, if you feel moved, to share any phrases or discoveries of your own in the comments below. There is a collective power in gathering the ways loving kindness moves through us, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with ease, sometimes only as hope disguised as habit. Have you ever noticed how offering a simple "may you be safe" to a stranger, or even to the ache in your own chest, can alter the weather of your hour? Or how the day, despite its outer sameness, feels changed not in color, but in temperature? It is easy, living amid turmoil and endless noise, to imagine that caring for yourself and wishing well for others are luxuries you cannot afford. But as you practice, as you lace kindness through breath, step, and attention, you discover that metta is not an extrait, is the thread holding together the fabric of endurance. In pain, or in the hollow of ordinary days, the willingness to say, even in a whisper, "May I find ease," or "May you know peace," is often the grain of sand upon which tomorrow's pearl will grow. So let this be your practice, not with the stiffness of ritual or the burden of obligation, but with the curiosity of someone learning the melody of their own heart. Walk, wish yourself well, wish the world well, and allow the repetition, however, strained or unsure at times to warm your journey. Remember that kindness is not a mood, nor a reward for having arrived somewhere rather. It is the path beneath your feet as you learn, with each step, to greet yourself and the world with a softness that finally makes breath, body, and mind safe enough to walk together. That is a gift both utterly ordinary and, in quiet moments, profoundly transformative. In the gentle hush that follows a walk, softened by loving kindness, the subtle metta that mires your inner voice in warmth instead of its usual tensiona, new curiosity might rise in you. It arrives not as enthusiasm, but as a quieter, abiding need, the kind that leaks through even the most impenetrable grief. It comes on those unmistakable days when sorrow grows large, when its shadow advances before you down the hall, and what kindness you can conjure feels like an umbrella too small for the sudden rain. Sometimes, loving kindness itself feels out of reach, perhaps not believable, or simply not enough to cradle what aches in your chest. The world's ordinariness resumes, unembellished. The city's churn continues, the calendar turns over, and in the privacy of your longing, all you want is some way to keep company with your pain so that it does not hold you by the throat. In these moments, compassion karuna becomes not only a word but a necessity, not just for the world, but for the precise knot of anguish inside your ribcage. The art is not to sugarcoat, not to overlay brightness, but to acclimate yourself to the weather of hurt, to learn to walk with it beside you rather than in your very breathing. You do not command the ache to vanish, nor charge into the day pretending not to limp. You do not perform for the onlookers, nor silence yourself in shame. Instead, You take a tentative step onto the sidewalk, into the corridor, along the worn carpet, holding your pain as one might carry a fragile glass wrapped in cloth, careful, attentive, bracing without squeezing. You take a breath, slow, unrushed. You find a cadencennot so different from before. A handful of steps, perhaps matching the pace of your heartbeat if it feels safe. Attention here is not directed at replacing agony with pleasant thought, but at dignifying the pain. May this too be held. You introduce the inward wish, not for instant transformation, but for the possibility of relief. May my suffering, however saturated or sharp, find rest, or at least a shoulder to lean on. With each stepping out, you accompany yourself and that hidden guest, and with every exhale you offer, may I meet this sorrow with the patience it quietly needs. This practice does not promise escape, nor does it insist upon dramatic reconciliation. Rather, it invites you into a new intimacy with yourself, a radical shift away from fixing, correcting, or minimizing. It is simply to notice. Pain is present. Where does it live? In your chest, as a tightness or burn. Behind your eyes, as a hot threat. In the pit of the stomach, as nausea or contraction. Here, you gently name it, acknowledging the presence of this wayward weather. Sometimes, the noticing itself will make the edges soften. More often, the ache persists, but becomes less fused, less identity, and more company. On your walk, be it brief, an errand, or an amble, or only a few measured passes at home, you bear witness to the honesty of your pain, neither embellishing nor diminishing it. The wish, may this pain find relief, does not glue itself to fairy tales. It does not demand cheerfulness. Its very shape is modest, supportive, just enough to help you keep moving, to lend you a sense, molecule by molecule, that suffering is part of the inheritance of being human, not a solitary failure. What emerges in time is not simply compassion for yourself, but a new openness to the rawness carried by others. For, as the sidewalk or floor unfurls beneath you, you begin to notice the microcosms of suffering all around: the hurried frown on the bus driver's face, the muttered argument of strangers crossing the street, the tilt of exhaustion in your neighbor's shoulder. You pass the child mid-tantrum, restrained on a leash of adult frustration, the delivery worker juggling boxes and missed deadlines, the pet whose limp is almost invisible but not quite. In these moments, without needing to sound a trumpet or recite elaborate poetry, your small heart extends itself outward. May that pain, too, find its resting place. May their burdens, just for a breath, grow lighter. Sometimes the offering leaps beyond what you could honestly wish for yourself. For the acquaintance with losses grown so immense, no wish feels worthy. May you find comfort. For the friend whose voice cracks under pressures they can neither describe nor relieve, may you be surrounded by those who will witness and stand by you. For the stranger whose eyes are rimmed red with sleeplessness, may your pain not go unseen. Like a wind traveling quietly between the trunks of an old forest, your compassion does its work without spectacle, soft, sometimes unacknowledged, but persistent. Yet, self-compassion is not an endless sacrifice of your own boundaries in worship of others' needs. Karuna, in its wise shape, knows it must circulate through you as much as beyond you. Compassion without limits can become depletion, so as you walk, you begin to sense also where "may I be well even as I suffer" requires "may I be protected from what deepens the wound." When fatigue overwhelm or fatigue threaten to blur the boundaries, the phrase is amended. May I step away from the sharpness. May I avoid what is too much for today. May I sense what will help me rest. The practice might take on a different physicality. You notice yourself choosing quieter streets, seeking out the small bubble of calm beneath a tree or at the edge of a park. The act of changing pace or direction becomes an act of integrity, a way to say, "The world is fierce and sometimes I must shield myself." Your compassion is not a blanket for everyone else, while you shiver it is an invitation to uphold tenderness as you decide where to walk, whom to engage, and how to let the day touch you. Through repetition, you may grow fluent in the language of recognizing pain without merging with it. You can pass through memories and griefs, through bitterness and rumination, as one would cross a river with cold but gentle water, feeling chill but not swept away. Some days, the ache dulls a shade, and you walk with a strange sense of accomplishment, not because the pain is gone, but because you have learned to be its witness rather than its captive. On more difficult days, when setbacks return or new wounds prick the surface, you resume the practice. Sometimes the words are scarce, little more than, "Here I am, hurting." On these days, you might find courage in just naming each sensation, one by one: tightness, pulsing, heat, ache, tired spin, old memory. For every one, offer whatever phrase floats up from the well. May you find ease. May you survive this hour. May you return to ground. Your walk is not a progress report, nor a lecture. It is a statement of solidarity. You are not demanded to be brave, only to be present and to offer comfort in the smallest currency available: attention. The vast comfort of this practice is in normalizing pain, not to idealize suffering, nor to polish away your own needs, but to acknowledge the honest, vast lineage of those who have lived with heavy hearts. As you pass others, as you see a friend's tired eyes, or hear the sharp edge of despair in another's voice, you move from isolation to inclusion. You begin to sense that your pain is not some aberrant flaw, but a shared frequency, a single instrument among countless others in the orchestra of human experience. Sometimes, compassion for others calls for action. Sometimes, it simply calls for silent recognition. You might discreetly hold a door, offer a nod, write a message, or cook a quiet meal for someone you will never meet. These gestures count, yes, but so do the moments when, unable to reform or intervene, you simply know and wish well. Even your private acts have impact. May your load be lighter. You offer, not knowing if the words will brush them. Still, you add this small act of recognition, a flickering lantern, in a world often far too dark. In this way, pain is something witnessed, not masked. Your ability to hold suffering with respectful attention becomes both shield and lantern. The self-directed wishes: may I care for myself, even when I am hurt. May I rest. May I accept my own pace. Let you set limits and choose gentleness. The world does not drain you quite the same when your own needs are given the seat at the table that exhaustion, guilt, and fear usually occupy. You come to see your own history with fresh eyes, not as a list of betrayals or disappointments, but as a series of experiences that invited you secretly to practice this radical hospitality to pain. Even the events you wish to erase become opportunities to exercise compassionate presence. And as you learn this kindness for yourself, you find your listening deepening in relationship to others. You do not always have advice, nor can you fix what is broken in someone else's sacred depths, but you can witness. You can extend the wish, sometimes silently, sometimes aloud. May whatever hurts here be held, not hidden. There are days, too, when anger or numbness masquerades as protection against the full reality of pain. In these moments, the karuna practice is to include even the anger, even the numbness. May I be gentle with what refuses to soften. May I meet resistance with patience. This, too, is compassion, not expecting sweetness where there is only burning, nor insight where exhaustion churns. Through each of these seasons, walking becomes a way to circulate and not exorcise a pain, to move with it, letting your feet pace your limits instead of pushing you beyond them. And so, the ritual grows stronger with repetition. Your footsteps draw small molars of dignity across the map of your day, shaping a path not of control but of accompaniment. The habit of showing up, of walking with your pain, speaking to it, making space for it remakes you at subtle layers. The world around you does not become easier, but the feeling of utter vulnerability, of being raw and exposed, lessens. Your posture shifts fractionally. Your shoulders curve a little less. Your voice carries nuance rather than resignation. Through all of this, the gift of karuna is not abolishing pain, but learning to hold it so that it no longer dominates. Sometimes the sorrow remains large, but you greet it as a guest, not as a jailer. You become host to your suffering and a neighbor to the pain of the world, not by inheritance or sainthood, but by the simple, stubborn refusal to meet this day's ache alone. And that changes your interior weather, drawing in not a thunderclap of relief but a tiny, persistent hope that being alive, even sore, is made more humane by the courage to keep walking. This practice, cultivated quietly, becomes a wellspring not just for your own survival, but for the invisible ways you nurture your connections. You learn that what you cannot heal, you can still hold. What you cannot solve, you can meet with presence. Whenever you find yourself overtaken by the urge to withdraw, to burn out or disappear, your feet bring you back into cohabitation with pain, not as a failure, but as the most responsible act possible for any human soul standing in front of the mirror of the world's suffering. And when tomorrow comes, or when another hour demands more than you think you can give, may you remember that you are permitted to pause, to redraw boundaries, to pick your roots and companions. May your compassion learn to include protection and rest, not only empathy and giving. This is the kind of wisdom the heart gathers when it walks tenderly beside the part of you that hurts and remembers to whisper, "May I, and all those in pain, know the relief that is possible in this moment, even if it is only the relief of being understood." Share, if you're moved, the stories or images that have surfaced as you attempted to walk with pain as your companion instead of your adversary. What phrases soothe when nothing rescues? What boundaries reawaken dignity? What gestures from strangers or friends have made carrying sorrow softer, even by a gram? In the listening, in the walking, in the naming, you discover another layer of allegiance to your lifer companionship with pain that neither glorifies nor exiles it, but leaves you standing, step by step, as both witness and caretaker, making room for gentle survival in the face of all that is difficult and real. As you traverse the quiet geography of your pain, gently escorting your sorrow as both host and humble friend, a surprising shift may begin. Tentative as the first crocus pressing through frost, is it possible, you wonder, for the heart to remember the taste of gladness when the world has become so deft at monochrome? Compassion has held you with steady, bittersweet hands through your hours of heaviness, and yet the air around you sometimes stirs with another question. Is there room, just the size of a coin or the length of a fleeting smile, for the joy that lives outside your own doorstep, for the breeze of delight that moves within others even on days when you yourself cannot muster it? Strangely, this is not envy or self-recrimination, but a longing both tender and shy, curious search for the music playing through someone else's window when yours is still shuttered tight. When depression or relentless greyness has pressed its weight on your senses, it tends to pull a veil across even the most vibrant things. The laughter of a neighbor, the celebration of a friend, even a stranger's small victory on the sidewalk all, can seem like party invitations addressed to everyone but you. The reflex, then, is to close the blinds of attention, to guard your gaze as if joy might be contagious in an uncomfortable way. But if you bring with you all that you have learned about walking with heaviness, this humility, the patience, the non-judgment, you can invite a new, gentler practice into your steps, to notice and almost venerate the joys that visit others, to kindle a small flame in your own soul by witnessing theirs without the usual urge to compare or self-blame. This is the heart of muditaith cultivation of sympathetic joy, or, as I sometimes imagine it, the art of letting others' happiness light a corner in your darkened home. It starts slowly, as these practices do. Perhaps you set out on your usual path through your neighborhood, in a park, in the gentle tumult of a busy street, carrying with you both your bittersweet longing and your understated readiness to be surprised. Your own heaviness is not wrong, nor does mudita require you to feign pleasure you do not feel. Instead, it welcomes you exactly as you are and simply asks that you keep your senses ajar, receptive to the subtle traces of joy life so sneakily scatters around. You might first notice the sound of a child's laughter as she launches herself in clumsy delight down a slide, or the small cluster of friends erupting at an inside joke, joys so ordinary they might easily escape a hurried gaze. At the edge of a leafy avenue, an old couple walks hand in hand while sharing soft, murmured words, the years carved gently into their faces. A young man at a cafe beams with satisfaction, the foam of his drink marked with a heart just as he likes it. Or perhaps, on the stoop of a building, someone lifts a bouquet of flowers to their cheek, closing their eyes to the perfume that transports them home. These are not spectacles, and they require no explanation. They are simply invitations from the world, scenes where gladness lands with the quiet inevitability of morning dew. Your practice is simple. Each time you notice a moment of joy in another, pause within yourself sometimes, letting your own longing sigh, sometimes feeling nothing at all but bare awareness, and quietly bless that happiness. May their joy increase. May the bright thread they carry be illuminated, unbroken, for at least one more breath. Your offering might be nearly wordless at first, a vague sense of turning toward goodwill even as a kernel of envy arises. You do not fight the envy or shame it. Instead, you let it pass like a train on a track beside your road. And once it passes, you gently return your gaze to the original scene, repeating within, may their happiness persist, may its warmth reach them. This isn't a forced generosity, nor a denial of your own hurt. Mudita unfolds best when you are honest about the sometimes ache of witnessing joy outside yourself. You are allowed to wish you too could feel light. You are allowed to be indifferent or numb at times. The gift of this practice is not that it replaces your weather, but that it offers you a window framed in acceptance through which to see the full sky of human feeling, not just your own clouds. Over time, the noticing grows subtler. Perhaps you observe the quiet accomplishment in someone piecing together a crossword on a park bench, or admire a runner's posture as they break into a grin, sweat streaking their forehead, simply delighted by their body's motion. You see the flash of pride in the eyes of a mother as her toddler navigates a curb, balance wavering but victorious. You allow the world in all its variance to continue happening even when your own days are slow or empty or hard. Each fragment of gladness you pass becomes not a rebuke, but a possibility, a sign that life is still coloring outside the lines you have drawn in grey pencil. You become, in a sense, a quiet witness to the edges of celebration. Sometimes you even find yourself offering a soft smile or a nodal wordless signal to the world that you have seen its goodness, that you are not wholly caught in the undertow. Yet when envy slips in with its sharp tongue, for them it's so easy, why not me? You pause, noticing its presence, and persist. Let it be. You do not clench around it. You do not charge it with wrongdoing. If you like, you can widen the circle here. May it continue to be easy for them. May a sliver of that ease visit me someday as well. As you practice, the mind shifts its register. Gradually, your outlook softens, not because you force gratitude, but because you learn to witness the diversity of being alive. The world is not a uniform slab of good for others, bad for me. It becomes a patchwork here. Joy, there, heartbreak. In one window, an argument. In another, a birthday song. Under one tree, a lonely cry. And across the street, the contagious clapping of a domino victory. You learn, too, that joy is not always loud or obvious. It reveals itself in quiet pleasure, well-tended garden, a stray dog dozing in a square of sunlight, a neighbor humming with her hands sunk in soapy water at the end of a long day. Slowly, there may come moments when your own memory stirs off, a day when you, too, were pleased by a task completed, or a meal perfectly seasoned, or the relief of a gentle rain after weeks of drought. Perhaps, today, your own gladness consists only of the smallest thing, a window open to the scent of new leaves, the comfort of socks just warm out of the dryer, the first mouthful of tea savoured without interruption. Mudita does not demand you ignore what hurts or leap into ecstatic glee. Instead, it offers a counterweight. When all else is dim, you can still bear witness to what shimmers, even in the lives of others. As this art grows within you, comparison loses its bite. You notice, without bitterness, that well-being is not parceled out in limited supply. Someone else's joy does not drain the world's reservoir. It adds to its depth. You cease tallying your losses against their gains. Instead, you return, again and again, to the invitation of the present. May all those whose faces I pass enjoy their share of ease, and may I too, when the time is right, be ready to let in gladness without apology. On difficult days, mudita can seem artificial, a performance of care you don't yet feel inside. Even then, Do not withdraw or accuse yourself of hypocrisy. There is value even in the mechanical repetition, in choosing to wish well, quietly and invisibly, when the heart is still closed. Sometimes the practice works backwards. You notice yourself pausing in genuine admiration or affection toward others, and only later realize that your own mood has lightened half a shade, unforced. The circuit of your attention, once narrowed by grayness, slowly eases open, letting possibility in as quietly as the dawn. You are not obligated to cheer for the whole world. Sometimes, your mudita is private, reserved for small scenes, the laughter of a friend on a video call, the shared humor of a stranger over a mishap at the store, the tiny victory of a colleague celebrated in a group chat. On days when you feel most raw, perhaps witnessing even this is too much. That's all right. Notice then what is simply neutral, a plant thriving, a street sweeper working with rhythm, the casual elegance of an old bicycle propped against a sunlit wall. In company too, mudita finds purpose. If someone trusted shares a piece of their contentmenta promotion, a love blossoming, an ailing pet's recovery, you practice not diminishing your own circumstances in response. Instead, see if you can let their joy fill a corner of the room. Perhaps you ask, "How did that feel?" or merely echo their smile. It is not an act of theatre. It is one of alignment, your fibers tuning for a moment to resonance with the happiness of another. And slowly, sometimes against your own anticipation, your heart remembers how to lighten. The empathy you have woven into your walk's compassion for pain, loving kindness for all, patience for your awkwardness lays the groundwork for this. With each stride you take, the world ceases to be the hard, bordered place where pain and pleasure are enemies. Instead, it is variegated, streaked with moments of brightness, difficulty, and quiet grace. Mudita whispers that all the see not just your wounds, but your neighbor's laughter, the cashier's pride, the toddler's glee belong to the story of being alive. Eventually, you might surprise yourself. There will be a morning when, before you realize it, the sun breaks and you walk more upright than usual, humming almost without thought. You might meet your own small happiness, maybe as unrehearsed as music rising from another apartment. You drink your coffee or tea and notice it, not as something owed or expected, but as a brief, luxurious permission. In these moments, can you remember the flavor of joy without debt or guilt? Can you just, for these few seconds, let it glow inside you without comparison or explanation? This is not triumph, nor is it discounting all your struggles. It is, instead, a gradual apprenticeship to joy, experienced sometimes as your own, sometimes as a guest in the lives of those you meet. It is perhaps the slow unveiling of gratitude's true meaning, not required positivity, but the ability to recognize beauty, success, and play wherever it sprouts, even if today its roots are across the fence or on the other side of the park. I invite you, in closing, to notice how often you have aura through the million tiny acts of your day's witnessed and honored joy, sometimes in others, sometimes in yourself, sometimes only in the music of the world. Maybe a comment here or there, a nod of understanding in a crowd, a shared laugh, or a respectful silence at someone's accomplishment. If you feel moved, share a story in the comments where another's happiness, however small, sparked a flicker in your mood or changed the weather of your afternoon. As we gather these shared remembrances, we see how the practice of sympathetic joy is not a relic for monks or mystics, but a living thread, spun between our ordinary mornings and solitary evenings. Let your steps, tomorrow or whenever you next walk, be open for the signs of gladness, weaving quietly through the landscape. Notice it, affirm it, even if you have to borrow a little warmth before your own returns. In time, mudita is not a mask, nor a demand, but an invitation you can offer inward and outward, a reminder that you and the world are allowed to host joy, no matter how delicately, alongside all the other stubborn, beautiful realities of being alive. In this light, every step becomes an act of grace, as you learn to walk not only with your difficulties, but with your eyes and heart open to the fragile, persistent joys that others carry, and which, on gentle days, may rest with you too. With every step that quietly celebrates the small fire of delight in the hearts of others, you begin to notice that your own being is marked by new, changing weather, gentler humility, a willingness to meet life not only at the height of feeling, but also with a grounded, wide-open gaze. What if, as you continue this journey, you become like a mountain, observing the cyclical play of sunlight and storm, not from indifference, but with an exquisite, compassionate impartiality? The art of mudita introduces you to sympathetic joy, loosening your grasp on bitterness and feeding your appreciation for the variety of human melody. Now, the question arises, can you allow your presence to grow wide and steady enough that all phenomena, joy and sorrow, hope and regret, beauty and grief are seen, held, and released with the spaciousness of the open sky? This is the subtle promise and practice of upekkha, equanimity, that deep, encompassing view that neither chases after pleasure nor recoils from pain but learns, slowly and honestly, how to meet everything as it is and, when the moment arrives, to let it pass. You might set out today along a familiar avenue or in the hush of a tree-lined path. Perhaps the neighborhood is washed in the pearly light of morning, or maybe dusk sends shadows stretching long over each car and curb. Sometimes you carry a tangle of thoughts, a memory that itches, a task that worries, a question that feels too heavy for any single walk to hold. Still, as your eyes soften and your body moves forward, you feel called to widen your field of attention, to soften the boundaries around what the mind habitually claims as urgent or central. Instead of zeroing in on the next concern or the task at hand, you breathe out and gently expand the lens. The world grows a little larger, people moving through their own tangled stories, birds navigating unseen matrices of air and hunger, the hum of traffic, the low thrum of distant voices, all woven into a wide tapestry. You realize you are a small but cherished strand in an immense weave. This is where upekkha quietly enters the cool, clear stream that runs beneath the surface heat of wanting, aversion, confusion, and fleeting achievement. Your practice is subtle but transformative. As you walk, you let your gaze become panoramic. You allow sensation, thought, sound, memory, all to brush the canvas of your experience, without insisting that each demands a personal response. You repeat softly to yourself, "I see the whole," and on each exhale, let it come and go. There is no need to judge or entangle. You do not have to fix the street, the stranger's frown, the flicker of hope, or the ache of regret. Each detail is allowed, just as the mountain accepts every gust and every drop of sunshine. Sometimes your mind rebels, mistaking equanimity for apathy or escape. You worry, am I abandoning my responsibilities, my passions, or my pain? But you discover, gently and slowly, that equanimity is not a withdrawal, but a rooting. It is a presence so steady that you become trustworthy to yourself. You neither grasp nor turn away, but stand like a sturdy tree amidst the turning seasons within and around you. In your body, you notice this as relaxation, a little unclenching of the fists, a heartbeat that feels content to simply persist. As you walk, heavy thoughts will sometimes surge with urgency, shouting for your complete identification. This is disaster. Nothing changes, only my struggle matters, or no one else understands. Instead of running with them, you recognize them as weather real, present, sometimes overwhelming, but never the whole sky. Equanimity invites you to step back without disowning, to say, this too is part of the world I inhabit, but it does not define me. The mountain does not mourn the storm nor gloat in the sunshine. You take another step, feeling how experience enters and leaves like breeze through leaves. In the midst of this practice, there will be choices moments when it is wise to act, to reach out, to change your pace, to respond to the needs of another or your own urgent longing. Equanimity is not the erasure of caring. It is the ability to discern what truly requires engagement and what can quietly drift by. A child falls and cries in the park. You pause, perhaps kneel, offer a smile or a gentle word. This, you know, belongs to your circle of influence, to your capacity to help. But the clouds that gather on the horizon, the whisper of an international tragedy, the gossip passing over a phone call, these you can notice with compassion, bow to the truth of their existence, and allow them to continue their journey without taking them on as burdens. There are small rituals that help anchor this state within you. You might find, after a while, that repeating gentle phrases brings the mind back when it catches and clings. You murmur, "I see the whole picture," or "Let me meet this moment with openness," or even simply, "This too belongs." When a difficult feeling, such as jealousy or despair, begins to churn, you pause and breathe and say, "Let this be here." Then, on the exhale, "Now, let it go." You patiently return, step after step, to the texture of the ground beneath your feet, the only place where the future and the past are briefly stripped of power. Some days, you will not feel the mountain's poise. You will be drawn in again and again by stories, old wounds, current irritations. This is not failure. It is the very soil in which upekkha roots itself. Each return from a spiral of thought to the spacious rhythm of presence is a stitch, a repair, in the fabric of your own steadiness. You learn to greet yourself without condemnation. Today, my horizon narrowed, and still I walked. Let me begin again. As equanimity strengthens its quiet hold in your days, you begin to notice a subtle shift in what you define as yours. The old drive to accumulate and hoard pain, grievance, joy, even wisdom softens. The world is allowed to flow. A bird's song is heard and then forgotten. A neighbor's laughter flares and drops away. Your own ruminations rise and fade, each granted its ephemeral life. In this acceptance, there comes a strange, paradoxical intimacy. You belong to every moment, precisely because you do not grip it. You are not a gatekeeper, but a host. You might feel, after a walk particularly blessed with equanimity, a certain lightness at the edges of all things. The mind, for so long an iron grasp, begins to trust the motion of release. You know now that you can witness delight or disaster, your own or another's, without being toppled or frozen. The energy once spent holding on is freed up for a kind of wise, compassionate engagement. Now, instead of being overrun by the urgent or the noisy, you can whisper to yourself, "What is truly here, and what can I let pass?" This gentle selection is not a denial, but a kindness to yourself and to the world. Sometimes the question occurs, am I missing out on richness when I choose not to entangle? But what settles in the heart is the realization that this is not numbness, but vividness, the ability to be with what is, instead of only with what is preferred. You see pain, celebrate joy, act where needed, release where wise, and through it all, a quiet thread of trust in existence itself is woven. You move through the city, the park, the living room, feeling not like an exile from experience, but its honored guest. When the walk is done, and you return to a stiller room or slower hour, you might reflect on this new permission you have given yourself. You notice that your own burdens have not vanished, nor have you solved the world's ills, but something fundamental has shifted in how you relate to the entire movement of things. The mind, less frantic, has found a gentle king in equanimity, one who rules not with force, but by allowing each citizen under the kingdom's flag. In relinquishing the need to cling or repel, you become both kinder and freer. Even the small acts of daily existence, answering an email, brewing tea, picking up clutter, become opportunities for this practice. When irritation surges because the message is curt or the laundry pile is high, you pause and return. Let it be here. And as you do, you notice the edges of your frustration melt, replaced by curiosity, even by gratitude. The world is wide enough for annoyance and serenity, for deadlines and dreams. Equanimity does not ask you to erase emotion. On the contrary, it gives you the strength to feel fully, to weep when tears are true, to laugh when laughter bubbles up, but to do so knowing that each experience is a guest, not a master. You remain the gracious host, acknowledging welcome and farewell in turn. You become, in a sense, a quiet revolutionary, undermining every pattern that says you must spin endlessly or sink beneath the weight of your own heart. As the seasons change, and this practice deepens not by effort, but by gentle repetition, you wake to a trust in both your smallness and your place in the great pattern. Some days you act, some days you let be, some days you are passionate, sharp, or uncentered. You forgive this, return to the panorama, and remember, this too, and again, this too. The sky is never emptied by weather. The world is never spent by the stories it holds. If this practice stirs something in you, I invite you to Sharivan, if only in the private forum of your heart moments, when equanimity rescued you, or when you met a day's mess with a stillness that was not indifference, but participation. Perhaps you will tell a friend, leave a message, or add your voice here in the comments, a reminder that all of us, in our own ways, are learning to let go, to hold, and to move through the richness of the world, unburdened by the need to clutch every passing cloud. Let your next walk, on whatever path you choose, be a living experiment in seeing widely, holding gently, and releasing wisely. May you meet both joy and sorrow, success and confusion, love and loss, with the spaciousness of the earth beneath your feet and the endlessness of the sky above your thoughts. And as you move, breathe, and return, may you know yourself as both the walker and the mountain, the one who journeys, and the one who remains, holding all weather, all storms, and every shimmer of sun with equal kindness, letting each come and each go, while you continue the most radical act of all, noticing and remaining just as you are. In this wide breathing space that equanimity has unfolded within you, you begin to sense a gentle invitation arising from the world itself, a call back to color, texture, music, taste, and the peculiar immediacy of touch. It is as if the very act of standing steady amid the currents of emotion and circumstance, being both walker and mountain quietly, clears a little haze from your vision, making possible a new, subtle curiosity. If you listen carefully, the world is asking, will you open again to the senses? Allow nuance to return to a terrain once flattened by struggle or numbness? Here, you find yourself at the threshold of another practice, not a wordless letting go or a panoramic letting be, but a deliberate act of reclaiming richness by courting the five senses and the silent pulse of feeling known as Vedana. You may notice that, in the long wake of difficulty or the slow fog of depression, everything loses its edges. Days run together, you move through rooms you barely see, tastes and scents blur into background noise, and even the pleasures you once counted on for comfort arrive only as faint echoes. The mind, so good at cataloguing catastrophes or manufacturing worries, grows deaf to the symphony constantly playing through body and world. The world seems grey, the hours interchangeable, yet lurking below that dullness is a forgotten capacity to notice again, intimately, the way this moment is constructed not just from ideas or problems, but from the direct contact of sense impressions. So you invite yourself to walk, not for the sake of exercise, nor even for the refined awareness of step and breath, but for the explicit purpose of reacquainting yourself with the fabric of lived experience. You step into the world as if visiting it for the first time, or as one freshly returned after a long convalescence. Your attention becomes an explorer, setting out with the promise to collect 5 distinct sights, 4 sounds, 3 sensations felt on the skin, 2 scents, and, if fortune permits, 1 taste that touches your tongue during the journey. This is not a task performed for triumph or distraction, but a courtship, a deliberate return to the lost country of your senses. As you begin, there is perhaps a faint resistance, an old reflex that expects disappointment, that dreads finding only monotony or neutral grays. And yet, you look with intention, the glint on a puddle where the sun has broken through for a moment, the overripe orange stranded on a neighbor's fence, the ripple in a curtain animated by the morning wind, the metallic dust of a car's wheel, the almost secretive ballet of a pigeon lowering its head to drink. Each item you name, silently or aloud, draws you a little further from abstraction back into the tangible theater, here and now. You lend your ears next, receptive to the collage that ordinary life composes without your permission. There, the hum of a passing bicycle, softer and higher than you expect. The crystalline clack of a spoon in a coffee cup from inside a cafe. Somewhere above, a shrill, insistent call of a bird, and at ground level, the heavy thud of your own steps against stone or concrete. One more sound reveals itself a burst of laughter, sudden and unguarded, from an unseen conversation behind a hedge. Each sound, identified and allowed to land, is neither judged as good nor bad, just present, another thread in this intricate tapestry of now. Perhaps the focus shifts to touch. Your attention, usually caught in thoughts and judgments, scouts anew for sensation, how the breeze slides cool up the inside of your sleeve, the snug, firm encirclement of your shoe at the ankle, the sudden prick of warmth on your cheek as you exit shadow into sun. Each sensation, neutrally catalogued, tells you how much is always happening beneath the level of notice. How, even in the dullest hour, the body is alive with messages that rarely make it to the surface consciousness. You encounter scent. Sometimes it is obvious, the astringent tang of cut grass, or the bloom of yeast and roast from a bakery's open door. Sometimes it is elusive a fleeting lift of soap from a passerby, the earthiness of damp pavement. Even if you struggle to catch these invisible threads, the attempt itself becomes a declaration. Yes, I am here, I am porous to the world, not simply sealed away by sadness or defense. And, perhaps most humbly, you caught taste. Maybe it is the remembered trace of mint from a morning tea, or the unexpected zest of air filled with rain about to fall. Maybe you bite into an apple as you walk, noting both the crunch and the first, bright fluidity of flavor. Even if taste escapes this walk, you hold the intention, honoring the sense's potential, ready for its return whenever it wishes. Now, with all this data gathered, something remarkable, the kind that rarely earns headlines or praise, begins to glimmer. The greyness does not vanish, nor must it, but the world, just for a span of time, ceases to be a single color or note. Instead, it arrives to you variegated, textured, impossibly plural. Each input, each small offering from your senses, is received not as a threat nor an imperative to be joyful, but simply as proof. Life is still happening in and around you, full of detail, richness, and degrees. It is here that the Buddhist wisdom of Vedana surfaces, softly profound. For every contact, every sensory impression, there is a subtle tonia flavor of experience that is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Rather than reflexively chase what pleases or run from what rattles, you practice naming the feeling that arises in response. The oily color in the puddle, pleasant, somehow, a shimmer against the world's fatigue. The harsh scrape of a truck's engine, unpleasant, jarring to the eardrum. The sensation of fabric at your elbow, neutral, not calling for approval nor rejection. You notice, with growing surprise, that much of your day is made up not of drama, but of these countless neutrals moments. You have never marked as friend or foe, simply zones of rest in the landscape of experience. This recognition transforms your walk. Each neutral, far from being boring, becomes a cushion, a small resting place from the extremes of mood. You realize that your nervous system starves not from lack of thrill or abatement of sorrow, but from absence of contrast, absence of nuance, absence of permission to be with what is merely neutral. You lean a little into the placenta second longer, watching sunlight ripple, a tiny savoring of warmth or scent, allowing these moments to soak in, however modestly. For the unpleasant, you breathe, letting the roughness pass through without collapse, understanding it as just one note among many. In time, neutrality itself becomes its own sort of grace. As you continue, you might discover a playful, almost childlike curiosity returning. You look at color and texture as if recalling how you once pressed your fingers into wet mud or studied the tracks of worms after morning rain. You marvel at how every element of the world carries with it a corresponding flavor in your own body-mind, and how, when attended to without agenda, experience becomes a living map, guiding you out of numbness, out of the prison of evaluation, back into the ever-changing now. Memories sometimes risey of colors that once stopped you still, flavors that awakened longing or nostalgia, songs that braided sorrow and sweetness into something bearable. These recollections are not signals to return to the past, but gentle reminders that your capacity to perceive was never lost, only sleeping. Even on the hardest days, one shaft of late sun sneaking across the wall can whisper, "Notice me, I am proof that you're still here. As your walk draws near its end, you may find the world inexplicably softer, your own mind less inflamed by all or nothing thinking. You become aware that, without attempting to cure or transcend your mood, you have managed to expand it. Texture has returned where only flatness lived. Colors and flavors, literal and emotional, now commingle, forming an inner landscape that is wider and more habitable than before. You can take this practice home. In the evening solitude, you run cool water over your hands and pay attention to the shifting sensations, first chill, then adaptation, then the simple comfort of the towel. You listen not for music, but for the hum of your refrigerator, the crumple of paper, even the small pulse in your own ear. You taste the spice in dinner, or the sweetness in fruit more deliberately, allowing even ordinary food to awaken memory and presence. And as you drift towards sleep, you remind yourself that the body is always offering up a palette for returning, for remembering that the world is built of differences, sound and silence, brightness and dusk, sweet and bitter, soft and rough, and so much in between. If you feel inspired, speak of what you rediscovered in your own walks in the comments or elsewhere. Was there a color that surprised you? A sound you welcomed back into your day? A neutral moment that became, in retrospect, an interval of peace? When you share these, you remind others, sometimes in the depths and blankness of their own grey landscapes, that the world has not run out of flavor, or perfume, or gentle song. Let your next journey along the street, through the market, on a shortcut to work, or simply around your own garden be a gentle scavenger hunt, an act of almost reverent attention to what the senses wish to offer. Gather these moments as evidence not for a case you must prove, but for the miracle of existing here, now, within a world resilient to monotony, so long as you remember to keep noticing. In this spirit of presence, with the five senses woken and the heart attuned anew to nuance and contrast, you reclaim an old but renewable promise that for as long as you choose to walk, to listen, to see, to savor, you belong to a living, unfinished world, never wholly dark, never wholly light, but always waiting for the next attentive, remembering step. And so it happens, in the gentle and attentive journey across the map of the senses, that the world which once felt flat or imaginary, the world pressed between the pages of pain or dulled by repetition, and habit opens itself with unexpected hospitality. Perhaps you have discovered, through this slow unraveling, that to restore the senses is also to subtly return to yourself, not to some ideal self, perfectly at peace or forever radiant, but a self that is simply, unapologetically present. This reconnection, this return to textured immediacy, gives rise in the heart to a longing that is both ancient and refreshingly new, a longing to feel, if only for moments, truly at home, not in the house or on the street, not even in the city or the memory of childhood, but in the very rhythm of your own being, homecoming with each step, each breath, each repetition of a phrase that reminds you, wherever you walk, you belong. And this belonging is an act, a choice, a mystery, continuously lived. One of the most beautiful gifts you can offer to yourself on this path is the practice of walking with gathas, those short, poetic verses or mindful sentences that shape the breath and align the mind with the body. Among the many teachers who have illuminated this path, the words of Thich Nhat Hanh glimmer with particular clarity, simple, portable, practical, yet carrying within them the hidden architecture of sanctuary. Imagine this. You step out, perhaps with intention, perhaps just to stretch your legs in the hour between one obligation and the next. As you breathe in, you synchronize the rise and fall of your feet with the silent phrase, "I have arrived." With the out breath, "I am home." At first, the mind will chafe at poetry, will want to solve, to analyze, to move towards some end, and the words may sound hollow. Arrived where? At home? How? Resist the urge to argue. Instead, plant the words like seeds and trust the slow work of their unfolding. As you walk, 2 deliberate steps with the inhale, letting the words, "I have arrived," settle somewhere beneath your ribs, and 2 steps with the exhale, offering, "I am home" to the world, your body, your street, The sky just now unfolding above you may feel at first only the tension or the fatigue, the resistance of a mind unwilling to release its many complaints. Persist gently. There is no pressure to perform, to transcend, to achieve anything through these verses. Gatha is not declaration, it is invitation. With repetition and with patience, you begin to notice the small shifts. Perhaps your hands unclench, perhaps the pressure in your jaw softens, perhaps even for half a block you sense, not only that the world is permissible, but you too are permissible, just as you are, in this precise and fleeting moment. It is a curious thing, the way these words attach themselves to the physical gesture of walking. I have arrived is not a destination on a map, not a final victory over restlessness, but an admission. All arrivals are temporary, and the act of coming home is always happening. Breath by breath, step by step. I am home does not rely on cozy interiors or loving arms or the absence of difficulty. It is, instead, a reclaiming of the present, the floor beneath your feet, the energy in your spine, the air trembling just outside your lips. The words are not an escape from reality, but a way to nourish your roots, even while the winds of anxiety or sadness howl nearby and try to uproot you. There is also a beautiful sequence, sometimes alternated or introduced as the walk continues, that deepens this quality of homecoming. With one pair of steps, you inhale and silently say, here, and with the next, as the body releases, now. The next inhale, smile, and on the exhale, release. The smile is not forced across the face. It is an inward warmth, a gesture toward kindness that need not show in the mirror. The release is not a command to drop all tension, but a nod to the possibility. Perhaps I can soften just a little with this next exhale. In this softening, the gap between longing and arrival shrinks, and the room for peace grows quietly behind the everyday noise. Even as repetition weaves these phrases into the rhythm of your walk, the world tries sometimes successfully to distract, to taunt you with old narratives. Am I wasting time? The mind will ask, what was the point of this walk? It is easy to chase after outcomes, to gauge the merit of this gentle ritual by whether mood or circumstance shifts dramatically in its wake. Yet the practice offers a different standard, not accomplishment, but presence. Perhaps a detail returns to you throughout the day, the way the breeze found your ear on a corner, the particular blue of a tile, the moment your feet remembered the earth as support, not battleground. These moments are not proof that you have changed, but living evidence that you, for these steps, were at home. There may be times too when the internal weather resists, sadness tightens everything, or boredom invites you back into distraction, or pain shouts for your attention. At first, the gatha can seem powerless, a whisper against a gale. Yet if you allow the words themselves to anchor you, to tie the boat of your awareness to the flowing current of steps and breaths, you will gradually sense that homecoming is not feeling good, but refusing to be a stranger to yourself. You belong, even in sadness. Home is the willingness not to cast yourself out. It is not unusual, as this practice ripens, to watch its effect ripple through the remainder of your day. In hours of tension or difficulty, you may find the phrase, I have arrived, I am home, returning to you as a silent companion, a woven thread that holds you to the fabric of the moment. It becomes a refrain, a reliable place to return when you are lost in speculation or rehearsing old wounds. When a moment of joy or comfort arrives unexpectedly, you receive it more fully, because your body and mind have rehearsed the act of arriving, of being available to inhabit a moment rather than merely pass through it. For many, the deepest gift of these walking gathas becomes their portability. You carry them not only on deliberate walks, but through rooms when you fetch a glass of water, along the path from work to car or bus, even in the transition from one room to another in your quietest hours. They become like talismans, chanted not aloud but in the heart, reminders that you do not need extraordinary conditions to experience your own intimacy with life. With each repetition, arriving and being at home are unhitched from circumstance and attached to a practice zone that remains undiminished by whether your mood is light or heavy, whether your steps are brisk or halting. Sometimes there is a temptation to make home into an idealer place where there is no conflict, no hard memory, no place for despair. The truth, as you practice, is that home is made more profound by its willingness to welcome the full spectrum of your experience. That you can arrive as you are, carrying both annoyance and ache, hope and regret, unfinished lists and quiet pride. In the act of affirming, "I have arrived, I am home," you declare that your presence in this world, in this moment, is valid, not to the exclusion of hope for change or the gentle wish for healing, but as the ground beneath all further becoming. A beautiful intimacy emerges in this practice, a softening toward yourself that may be unfamiliar. You notice how your breath carries you without being commanded, how your feet remember the choreography even when your attention slips away, how the heart's longing for respite is met not with grand promises, but by returning again and again to the next step, the next inhale, the next rhythm of words. And in this rhythmic partnership, you remember that you are not as far from peace as you supposed. The homecoming is ongoing, spacious, elastic enough to hold your entire contradiction. Perhaps you remember a moment from childhood at time when, after wandering or being lost, you finally saw the light in your own window, the shape of your mother's hands, the warmth of a familiar chair. Perhaps the memory itself is bittersweet, colored by absences or sorrow, but what the body remembers is the sense of being allowed to stop searching, if only for those first few breaths after arrival. In walking with Garthars, you give yourself these moments not once, but again and again. Your inner window lights up, no matter where you are in the world. This practice, too, is generous, even when you falter. There will be hours when you forget the words outright, when frustration or distraction scatter your best intentions. Still, you are permitted to resume without blame. The Gartha is always available, ready to meet you at the first remembered breath, at the step you take after the detour, or the instant you pause mid-rush and let yourself begin again. There are no gates to this home, no locks on the door, only the willingness to drop your resistance, if only for a heartbeat. If you find yourself moved by this practice, consider sharing what arrival and home feel like for you, whether it is a scent that reminds you of safety, a texture beneath your palm, the first sip of tea in silence after a busy day, the sound of someone you love greeting you from the other room, or perhaps the invocations feel distant, difficult to embody. That too is Homea place, where even the lost are permitted to enter, where weariness is not banished, but offered a seat by the fire. You are not rehearsing a performance, but remembering the feeling of inclusion, even if your mind has grown out of practice. And as your day winds down and your walk becomes memory, let the cadence of the Gatha echo softly. Each time you cross a threshold, literal or figurative, repeat, if you wish, "I have arrived, I am home." Let it carry you into the sanctuary of your body, your mind, your breath. Let it support you during storms and anchor you in celebration. When you awake in the night with worries blooming, or when sorrow knots itself anew in the morning, let these words be a quiet bridger way back to belonging, to the only place you can ever truly live. This body, this day, this mysterious and unrepeatable moment of being. In sharing these words and carrying them into your own space corridors, doorways, sidewalks, kitchen tiles, you offer the world not just your presence, but your willingness to belong. May you find, in each small arrival, the certainty that you are permitted to be here, to rest, to begin again. And when tomorrow's path opens, let these lines keep you company, not as burdens, but as the softest call Homea reminder, with every step and every breath, that you are, after all, already arrived. And now, as you carry with you the memory of arriving home through each step, each breath, each gentle repetition of those small, sheltering verses, the Gatha, that softens your descent into the present, you might begin to sense an opening, something barely audible and yet as persuasive as a river below the ice. For a long while, your practice has been that of the solitary walker, a patient choreography between your breath and the earth, between your struggles and your fleeting arrivals in the silent sanctuary of your own being. Yet beneath that self-tending silence, another yearning stirs, yearning as old as morning light, and as vital as the pulse that carries you forward. It is the wish to be companioned, to walk together. In the first chapters of struggle, especially those shaded by the long, slow burn of sadness or the dry abrasion of anxiety, solitude may feel like an instinctual refuge, like a cave where you might mend. But over time, as you become gentler with yourself and find in walking a home for your restless heart, something else surfaces. The simple, animal ache not to be alone in the effort to persist. Sometimes the mood grows so dim or the thoughts so brittle that it feels as though your footsteps echo off the walls of your isolation, that old tapes replay. No one can understand this. No one sees you. No one is here. It is true that some scrapes of living are yours alone, yet our deepest restoration is never manufactured in solitary triumph. It is quietly born in the murmur and warmth of shared effort, in the non-verbal music between friends or companions, who agree if only for a single morning not to leave you alone with your weight. Imagine then, in the hush that follows your solitary mantra, that you text two people who understand how your silences work, or perhaps you are lucky enough to live close to someone who already walks with you in mutual respect. You do not need to make a grand invitation to dress your feelings in formal language. It is enough to propose, 20 minutes can we walk together quietly. This is not a call for story or analysis or unveiling of hardship. It is a gesture of presence, a shared agreement that you will inhabit those 20 minutes, not as performers, not fixing or guiding, but simply as bodies moving in harmless parallel, holding open a pocket where words are neither expected nor forbidden. And so you gather, 3 people or 2 or 10, if a group quietly forms a human braid, loosely woven but unbreakable for the duration, perhaps in a park or alongside water or up a familiar street where your feet already know the cracks and corners. You do not take a selfie. You do not schedule for effect. You allow the walk to begin in its own rhythm, one person a little quicker, another daydreaming, someone else pausing to adjust a collar or greet a dog along the way. The city or suburb or field feels almost new when its sounds aren't muted by headphones or filtered through the need to narrate, but can simply enter soft shoes on gravel, distant laughter, a bird remarking overhead, or even the subtle clatter of your own united silence, tightening the air into something close to prayer. The beauty here is the absence of demand. You are neither obligated to make cheerful conversation, nor to spill the contents of your heart unless you choose to. Your task is only to walk side by side or in line, sometimes brushing arms, sometimes spread out along the path. Even should you pass a neighbor or someone you know well enough to wave, there is no social theater to perform. You are shielded by the common purpose, which is simply not to force anything, to allow the fullness of presence, the ordinariness of moving together, to do its quiet, necessary work. You might be surprised at how, in these walks that offer neither distraction nor diagnosis, a gentle belonging arises. Without needing to summarize your interior life or explain your mood, you sense your edges have softened. The press of solitude is thinned, the inner commentary loses volume, and something like safety materializes as safety, made not of explanations or reassurance, but of being witnessed, included, respected. There is a rare power in simply being allowed to walk alongside others without expectation, to let the ground absorb what cannot be said, to know that as your breath and feet keep the companioned rhythm, you are carried by something older than talk. As you walk on, perhaps your mind notices how difficult it would have been, in another chapter, to appear needy or vulnerable, to say, I do not want to be alone, but I do not want to expose my wounds either. But here, in this silence, punctuated only by the ambient chorus of the world, there is no need for declarations. Suffering is not paraded, but neither is it concealed. The mere act of not carrying it in solitude begins to work a different kind of alchemy. Your sorrow or weariness is ennobled by presence, and the days when your burden seems immovable are lightened, fraction by fraction, by sharing the simple physical act of moving through time together. If you are in a season of strength, you may catch yourself unconsciously setting an easy, grounding rhythm for those who shuffle along with greater care. If you are the one for whom the day is heavier, you may fall a half step behind, noticing how the cadence of those around you provides an almost physical supporter reminder that you do not have to lead, that you can be carried just a little by the current of shared momentum and wordless permission. Some days, you are the literal shelter. Other days, you receive the shelter. Rarely does anyone say this aloud, but bodies know, and kindness is built less from rules and more from repetition. At times, perhaps when you reach the end of a particular park or a milestone tree, someone in the group will propose a pausier brief circle, a moment to stand together, no longer moving, letting silence pool between you. In such a circle, you might each be invited to utter just one phrase. It could be anything from, "I'm grateful for this," to, "Today was hard, but I walked," or "Thank you for coming," or even an honest, trembling, "I didn't want to be alone." No speeches, no analysis, no compulsion for comfort. What you exchange here is not advice, not solutions, but the medicine of presence. This practice, which might have begun as a single, perhaps trembling experiment, can softly root itself into your days. You arrange another walk. Maybe it becomes a weekly appointment, a Sunday dawn, a Wednesday after work, a Friday twilight before the week closes, and another kind of dark or fatigue arrives. Over time, the expectation of these meetings, knowing that you have a date not with solitude but with others who understand the paradox of needing both silence and company, becomes a track laid through your week, a subtle support, an internal promise that you no longer walk alone. For those of you who, in this season, walk more by yourself than with others, let there be neither shame nor despair. Remember that every sidewalk, every ravine, every distant city harbors others who, right now, are carrying their own bruised tenderness, pacing the same silent corridors, trying to make good use of another gentle routine. When loneliness bites or emptiness rings sharply, imagine, if you can, that your feet are in silent correspondence with theirs, that your act of walking, even in physical solitude, is part of a wider choreography woven across space and time, shared by countless others called to this secret, wordless camaraderie. On one of your future walks, if you feel so moved, mention it to a friend or invite someone whose company doesn't ask you to perform or transform. Explain only as much as you wish, "Let's just walk," no expectations. Or simply say, "I'd like to try something walking without talking, just to feel not alone." The invitation itself is the ritual. Your openness, your willingness to coexist in wordless effort, becomes a gesture of trust, a subtle offering of hospitality. Some will accept, some will not. Even the longing to invite is evidence that your internal walls are not as forbidding as they seem. Should you be fortunate enough, over time, to call a small group into being, you may find the most healing moments are not the ones adorned with insight or laughter, but the ones textured by ordinary realities. The sound of everyone's footfalls mixing, the quiet awareness that nobody is trying to cheer or fix you, the relaxed understanding that silences are not failures of friendship, but the music of safe company. For some, these walks may be the only spaces in a week set aside for not striving, for genuine mutual shelter. You might find that as these walks become woven into your life, other forms of connection gently grow. Messages exchanged not as demands for quick replies, but as quiet check-ins, or the sharing of a song, a photo of a favorite path, or the news of a difficult day, expressed not in expectation of comfort, but as the simple act of being seen. Gradually, your sense of loneliness loosens, not because every problem has been vanquished, but because the perimeter of your existence is no longer defined solely by your own striving, suffering, or analysis. Your moods will rise and fall, some weeks carrying you easily, others asking more from you than seems possible. But with these walks, these short, shared pilgrimages through the arboretum of ordinary moments you create for yourself and for each companion, an antidote to the venom of isolation. Micro-communion, the quiet dignity of simply showing up and being together. No crisis need occur, no solution need be found. What matters is that you let yourself be held by silence, by step, by witness, by a presence that asks nothing from you except honest movement from here to there. Perhaps, living alone or walking alone much of the time, you will find meaning in the image or idea of joining the invisible legion of fellow walkers. Whisper, inwardly if you like, even when I feel alone, I am walking with hearts like mine in other rooms, on other paths, in other cities. We are together, even unseen. Someday, when it feels right, extend your hand invite, suggest, let the possibility of accompanied silence become part of your week. This need not be a grand affair. One person is enough. The intention is not volume, but depth. Connection, lived with honesty, patience without demand. If you feel compelled by the experience or wish to bless others with the gift you have found, share a word in the comments or privately reach out and invite someone to try such a walk with you. Your story might encourage another to soften their armor, to dare the risk of being met in their wholeness, not in spite of their struggles, but precisely alongside them. If, on some walk, whether alone or in shared silence, a thought rises gratitude, or sorrow, or a memory of a friend now gone, let it pass through the community of your steps, honored and carried, never trivialized by judgment or urgency. May your next walk, whether in the early gold of dawn, the silver hush of evening, or the changing blue hours in between, be not merely an act of exercise or escape or duty, but an act of quiet belonging. May you gather, however you can, with those whose companioned presence adds gravity to your purpose and ease to your earnestly carried burdens. Let the world's clatter dissolve as your group moves forward, letting the silence and the mutuality stitch a gentle, invisible blanket across everyone's shoulder. In this way, each shared step is a rebellion against the ache of being without witness. Each session, a testament that the simple act of walking together, in trust, in wordless solidarities, sometimes the most essential kindness you can offer or receive. And wherever you walk from here, may you take with you the living memory of step and silence, of pain tended and peace permitted, of community made not from speaking, but from simply not walking alone.